The grandfather clock in the main hallway chimed 5 times, its deep sounds echoing through the still dark Harrington mansion. Eleanor Mills opened her eyes before her alarm could ring. After 43 years of waking up at the same time, her body didn't need reminders anymore. She sat up slowly, feeling the familiar ache in her back and hands. At 72, Eleanor had earned every one of those pains. She switched on her small bedside lamp and looked at her hands in the warm light. They were weathered, spotted with age, the knuckles slightly swollen from arthritis. Working hands. Servant's hands, not a pianist's hands. Not anymore. Eleanor dressed quietly in her gray uniform, pinned her silver hair into its usual neat bun, and made her bed with hospital corners. Her small room in the servants' quarters was tidy and sparse. A single bed, a wooden dresser with a mirror, a chair, and a small bookshelf filled with paperbacks. The only personal touch was a faded photograph of a young woman standing beside an upright piano, smiling at the camera. Another day, Eleanor whispered to herself, a ritual she'd kept for decades. She made her way down the narrow back staircase to the kitchen, her rubber-soled shoes silent on the polished steps. The mansion was still asleep, and this quiet hour belonged to her. Eleanor started the coffee maker for the rest of the staff who would wake soon, and filled the kettle for Mrs. Harrington's morning tea. The kitchen was her domain until 6, when the cook would arrive to prepare breakfast. Eleanor enjoyed these solitary moments before the house came alive with demands and duties. She prepared her own simple breakfast, toast and tea, and ate it standing by the window, watching the sky lighten over the estate's gardens. At 6:30, she began her rounds, starting with the ground floor. The Harrington estate had 23 rooms, not counting bathrooms or hallways. Eleanor had a system, honed over decades, that allowed her to maintain the immaculate standards Mrs. Harrington expected. The East Wing was always first. Eleanor pushed her cleaning cart through the grand hallway, its wheels making a soft sound on the marble floors. The walls were lined with oil paintings of stern-looking Harrington ancestors and landscapes of places Eleanor would never see. She dusted each frame carefully, a ritual performed so many times that her hands moved on their own. Then she reached the music room. Eleanor paused at the threshold, as she did every morning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden light across the polished wooden floor and highlighting dust particles floating in the air. In the center of the room stood the Steinway grand piano, its black surface gleaming like a dark mirror. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor entered. This room was always left for last in her morning routine, though she told herself it was because the light was better later for detailed cleaning. She moved around the space, dusting the bookshelves lined with sheet music, straightening the already perfect chairs, polishing the brass picture frames. All the while, the piano waited. When everything else was done, Eleanor approached it. She ran a soft cloth over its surface, removing imaginary dust. The piano was always immaculate, as if it sensed her reverence and kept itself clean. She lifted the fallboard that covered the keys with the same care one might use when opening a precious book. The ivory and ebony keys seemed to glow in the morning light. Eleanor's hand hovered above them, trembling slightly, close enough to feel the cool surface but not touching. Never touching. "Good morning," a young voice said from the doorway. Eleanor snatched her hand back, closing the fallboard with a snap that sounded too loud in the quiet room. She turned to find Lily, the youngest Harrington daughter, watching her with curious eyes. "Miss Lily, you're up early," Eleanor said, smoothing her apron with suddenly nervous hands. "Would you like breakfast? I can tell cook you're awake." 12-year-old Lily shook her head, her dark hair swinging. "I couldn't sleep. I have a big recital coming up." She walked into the room and sat on the piano bench, looking up at Eleanor. "Were you going to play?" "No, miss. Just cleaning," Eleanor said quickly. Too quickly. Lily frowned, her observant eyes so like her grandmother's, studying Eleanor's face. "You looked like you wanted to. Do you know how?" "It's not my place," Eleanor answered, which wasn't really an answer at all. She began gathering her cleaning supplies, signaling an end to the conversation. "Cook will be making blueberry pancakes today. Your favorite," but Lily didn't move from the bench. "I've seen you before when you think no one's watching. Your fingers move sometimes when you dust the piano, like you're playing a song in your head." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. Had she been so careless? "I should finish my rounds." Miss Lily, the silver in the dining room needs polishing before breakfast. My piano teacher says you can tell a real musician because they hear music even when it's quiet. Lily continued undeterred. She opened the fallboard and pressed one key, a middle C that rang clear in the room. Do you hear music, Eleanor? The note hung in the air between them, and Eleanor felt a pull so strong it was almost physical. For a moment she could see herself sitting on that bench, her fingers dancing across the keys, bringing to life the melodies that had never stopped playing in her head. Miss Lily, came Mrs. Harrington's voice from the doorway, sharp with disapproval. You know better than to bother the staff during their duties. Both Lily and Eleanor straightened instinctively. Mrs. Harrington, though in her 70s, was an imposing figure in her silk robe, her silver hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour. I wasn't bothering her, Grandma, Lily protested. We were just talking about music. Mrs. Harrington raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. Eleanor has work to do and you have a recital to practice for. I don't pay the servants to discuss music appreciation. Yes, ma'am, Eleanor said, her eyes downcast. I was just finishing here. Actually, I'm glad I found you, Mrs. Harrington said, her tone shifting to business. We need to discuss arrangements for the charity gala. Mr. Peterson just called to cancel his performance. Apparently he's accepted a more prestigious engagement in Vienna. She said this with thinly veiled irritation. Eleanor nodded, mentally adjusting her day's schedule to accommodate gala preparations. The annual Harrington charity event was the household's most important social function, bringing together the city's wealthiest and most influential people. This year's gala was just 3 days away. I'll make sure everything else is in order, ma'am, Eleanor assured her. We still have the string quartet for the cocktail hour, and the jazz ensemble for after dinner. It's not the same, Mrs. Harrington sighed. Peterson was to be our centerpiece. You know how everyone looks forward to the piano solo before the auction. She tapped her perfectly manicured nails against the doorframe. I'll have to make some calls, see if anyone is available on such short notice. Maybe Eleanor could play, Lily suggested innocently. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Harrington looked at her granddaughter as if she'd suggested serving fast food at the gala. Don't be ridiculous. Lily, she said finally, Eleanor is our housekeeper. The way she said it made it clear that being a housekeeper and being a pianist were as different as night and day. Two worlds that could never overlap. I'll start calling the agencies right away. Ma'am, Eleanor said, eager to end the uncomfortable moment. Mrs. Harrington nodded and turned to leave. Come along, Lily, let Eleanor get back to work. Lily reluctantly stood from the piano bench, but before following her grandmother, she gave Eleanor a curious look. You didn't answer my question, she whispered. Do you hear music when it's quiet? Eleanor glanced at Mrs. Harrington's retreating back, then quickly back to Lily. Always, she whispered back, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. Lily grinned and skipped after her grandmother, leaving Eleanor alone with the piano once more. Eleanor closed the fallboard gently and finished gathering her cleaning supplies. As she pushed her cart toward the door, she paused and looked back at the silent instrument. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the feel of cool keys beneath her fingers, the joy of bringing melodies to life, her mother's proud smile as she played their old upright piano in the tiny house where she grew up. Then she closed the music room door firmly behind her and continued with her day. The melodies in her head, the only music she allowed herself to keep. Eleanor sat on the edge of her narrow bed, rubbing cream into her aching hands. The day had been busier than usual, with the entire household in a frenzy over the charity gala preparations. Mrs. Harrington had spent hours on the phone trying to find a replacement pianist. Growing more frustrated with each call, the kitchen staff was testing menu items. The gardeners were bringing in fresh flowers, and Eleanor had supervised it all while also completing her regular duties. Now, in the quiet of her room, she finally had a moment to herself. She reached under her bed and pulled out an old wooden box. Inside was a faded photograph, a few yellowed newspaper clippings, and a small jar filled with buttons of different colors and sizes. Eleanor picked up the photograph, the same one that stood on her dresser, and studied the young woman's face. "Oh, Mom," she whispered. "I almost slipped today." In her mind, Eleanor traveled back 60 years to the small coal mining town where she grew up. Their house had been tiny but always full of music. Her mother, Rose, played piano at the local church and gave lessons to neighborhood children to earn extra money. Their own piano had been old and slightly out of tune, but to young Eleanor it had sounded like heaven. Eleanor had been just 4 when she first climbed onto the piano bench beside her mother. By 5, she could pick out simple tunes by ear. By 7, she was playing hymns for Sunday school while her mother led the adult service in the main church. "You have a gift," Rose would tell her, tucking Eleanor's hair behind her ears. "A true gift from above." Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering the cool touch of the keys beneath her small fingers, the way her mother would beam with pride when she mastered a difficult piece. Those had been happy years, despite their poverty. Her father worked long hours in the mines, coming home with coal dust embedded so deeply in his skin that he never looked quite clean. But in the evenings, he would sit in his chair by the stove, eyes closed, listening to Eleanor play. "That's my girl," he would say, his voice rough from coal dust, "playing like an angel." There had been a mason jar on their kitchen shelf labeled "Eleanor's Future" in her mother's careful handwriting. Every spare penny went into that jar, money for music school someday for the future her parents dreamed she would have. Then came the accident. Eleanor was 15 when the mine collapsed. Her father and 11 other men never came home. She could still remember every detail of that day: the sound of the warning siren, the women running toward the mine entrance, the terrible waiting as rescuers dug through tons of rock and earth. The funeral costs emptied the Eleanor's Future jar. Her mother took on extra cleaning jobs, but the coughing started soon after. The doctor called it miner's widow's disease, though Eleanor suspected it was grief as much as coal dust that had settled in her mother's lungs. By 16, Eleanor knew they couldn't manage. The medical bills piled up and her mother grew weaker. That's when she heard about the position at the Harrington estate. They were looking for a housemaid, and the pay was good, enough to cover her mother's medicine and maybe even a specialist in the city. Eleanor set the photograph back in the box and picked up one of the newspaper clippings. It was from the local paper, a small mention of a piano recital where she had performed Chopin's Raindrop Prelude. The reviewer had called her a remarkable young talent with extraordinary promise. She had been 14 then, with dreams of conservatory and concert halls, dreams that died the day she walked through the service entrance of the Harrington estate. Old Mr. Harrington, the current Mrs. Harrington's father-in-law, had been a stern man with rigid ideas about the proper place of servants. The rules had been explained to Eleanor on her first day. Servants were to be invisible, efficient, and above all, to remember their station. "You are here to serve, not to socialize," the head housekeeper had told her. "The family's possessions are not for your use or enjoyment. You clean the piano? You do not play it." For the first few months, Eleanor had obeyed without question. She sent most of her wages home to her mother, and worked tirelessly to prove herself worthy of keeping her position. But one evening, when the family was away at a dinner party, she found herself alone in the music room with the previous piano, a beautiful Bösendorfer that seemed to call to her. Just one piece, she had told herself. Just to remember. She had lost herself in the music, playing from memory one of her mother's favorite pieces. She didn't hear the car returning, didn't notice anything until old Mr. Harrington's voice cut through the final notes like a knife. "What do you think you're doing, girl?" The fury in his eyes had terrified her. He had threatened to dismiss her immediately, ranting about the impropriety, about servants who didn't know their place. Eleanor had fallen to her knees begging for her job, explaining about her sick mother, the medical bills, the desperate need for the income. In the end, he had relented, but with a warning. "If I ever catch you touching that piano again for anything other than dusting it, you'll be out on the street. Is that understood?" Eleanor had nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, sir." It won't happen again. And it hadn't, not once in 56 years. A knock at her door jolted Eleanor back to the present. She quickly put the box away before calling, "Come in." Lily stood in the doorway, still in her school uniform, her dark hair now in a messy ponytail. "Eleanor, can I ask you something?" Eleanor straightened up, surprised. The family rarely came to the servants' quarters. "Miss Lily, is everything all right?" Lily stepped inside, looking around the small room with undisguised curiosity. Her gaze lingered on the photograph of young Rose by the piano. "That's your mom, isn't it?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes, a long time ago. She played piano too." Eleanor felt a flicker of alarm. Why do you think I play, Miss Lily? Lily sat on the chair by the small desk. I've been watching you. For my school project about observation. When you dust the piano, your fingers move like they know exactly where each key is. And sometimes during concerts, when everyone else is watching the performer, you're watching their hands with this look on your face. She trailed off, then asked suddenly, why don't you play anymore? The directness of the question caught Eleanor off guard. It's complicated, Miss Lily. Some things just aren't meant to be. That's a grown-up non-answer, Lily said with the brutal honesty of a 12-year-old. Were you good? When you used to play? Eleanor hesitated, then sighed. What harm could come from telling the child a little story? Yes, I was good. My mother was a piano teacher and she said I had a natural ear. So why did you stop? Did you get hurt? Lily looked at Eleanor's hands with concern. No, nothing like that. Eleanor smoothed her apron, a habit when she felt uncomfortable. Life just took a different turn. My father died when I was young and my mother got sick. I needed to work, to take care of her. But that doesn't explain why you couldn't play anymore, Lily persisted. Lots of people work and still have hobbies. Eleanor smiled sadly. At the Harrington estate, things were different back then. Old Mr. Harrington, your great-grandfather, had strict rules about servants using family possessions. You mean you weren't allowed to play the piano because you were a maid? Lily's eyes widened. That's horrible. It was just how things were, Eleanor said gently. Different times, Lily looked indignant. But that's not fair. If you had a talent, Miss Lily, Eleanor interrupted, her tone firmer now. That was a long time ago. I've had a good life here. The Harrington family has been very good to me. Lily didn't look convinced. Do you ever miss it? Playing, I mean. Eleanor looked at the girl's earnest face and found she couldn't lie. Every day, a moment of silence hung between them. Then Lily stood up. I should go before Grandma notices I'm gone. She doesn't like me pestering the staff, as she puts it. It's not pestering, Eleanor said softly. But yes, you should go. At the door, Lily turned back. Eleanor? My recital is tomorrow night. I'm playing Debussy's Clair de Lune. Do you know it? Eleanor felt a pang in her chest. Yes, it's beautiful. I can't get the middle section right. The flowing part. My teacher says I'm being too mechanical. Lily bit her lip. Could you maybe help me just once? Eleanor froze. Miss Lily, I couldn't possibly. Please? No one would know. We could use the piano in the library. No one ever goes in there, and it's all the way on the other side of the house from Grandma's rooms. Looking at the hope in Lily's eyes, Eleanor felt something stir inside her that had been dormant for decades. A longing so powerful it almost took her breath away. Just once, Lily pleaded, to help me with my recital. Eleanor knew she should refuse. 56 years of habit told her to say no. But instead she heard herself say, tomorrow morning when your grandmother has her hair appointment. 6:30 in the library. Lily's face lit up with a grin. Thank you, Eleanor. You won't regret it. As the girl skipped away, Eleanor sat back down on her bed, her heart pounding. What had she just agreed to? After all these years, to break her vow, to risk everything. Yet beneath the anxiety, she felt something else. A flutter of excitement, of anticipation. Tomorrow, after more than half a century, her fingers would touch piano keys again. Eleanor barely slept. She tossed and turned in her narrow bed, her mind racing with worries and long-buried memories. By 5 in the morning, she gave up trying to rest and got dressed, her hands shaking slightly as she buttoned her uniform. This is madness, she whispered to herself in the mirror. Complete madness. But a stubborn voice inside her, one that sounded suspiciously like her mother's, kept saying, just once. After all these years, just once. At 6:15, Eleanor made her way through the quiet house to the library. This room was used less than the others, especially since the younger Mr. Harrington preferred working in his home office. The library piano was an upright model, not as grand as the Steinway in the music room, but still well maintained. Eleanor had dusted it hundreds of times over the years, always careful, always respectful, never allowing herself even a single note. She stood before it now, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would wake the household. Slowly, Eleanor lifted the fallboard. The keys seemed to glow in the early morning light filtering through the heavy curtains. She reached out a trembling hand but stopped just before touching the ivory. I knew you'd come early. Eleanor jumped, nearly slamming the fallboard down. Lily stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas with a robe thrown hastily over them, her hair a tangled mess. "Miss Lily, you startled me," Eleanor whispered, stepping away from the piano as if caught doing something wrong. Which she reminded herself she was. Lily closed the door quietly behind her. "I couldn't sleep either. I kept thinking about how you're going to help me get that middle section right." She padded across the room in her slippers and sat on the piano bench. "Grandma left already. She has breakfast with her friends before her hair appointment on Thursdays." Eleanor nodded, relief washing over her. "Still, we should be quick. The rest of the house will be up soon." Lily patted the space beside her on the bench. "Sit with me, please." With a deep breath, Eleanor sat down, perching on the edge of the bench as if ready to leap up at the first sound of approaching footsteps. The familiar feeling of sitting at a piano, something she'd done countless times as a girl, felt both strange and right, like returning to a childhood home after decades away. "Show me what you're having trouble with," Eleanor said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. Lily opened her sheet music and began to play Clair de Lune. Her technique was good. Clearly, she'd been well taught. But as she reached the middle section, her playing became stiff and mechanical, losing the flowing quality that made the piece so beautiful. "Stop," Eleanor said gently. "You're thinking too much about the notes and not enough about what they're saying." "What they're saying?" Lily looked confused. "Music speaks," Eleanor explained, her hands hovering over the keys. "This piece is like moonlight on water. It needs to flow, to shimmer." Her fingers trembled, just centimeters from the keyboard. "Show me," Lily urged. Eleanor closed her eyes. 56 years melted away. She placed her fingers on the keys and the contact sent a shock through her body. Then slowly she began to play. The notes were hesitant at first, like a person testing cold water with their toes. But soon the music began to flow from her fingers as if it had been waiting all this time, trapped inside her weathered hands. The Debussy piece came back to her from some deep place in her memory. Not just the notes, but the feeling of it, the gentle ebb and flow, the shimmer and sparkle, the poetry of it. She forgot about Lily sitting beside her, forgot about Mrs. Harrington and her rules, forgot about being a 72-year-old housekeeper who hadn't touched a piano in over half a century. In that moment, she was just Eleanor, the coal miner's daughter who could make music sing. When she finished the section, the final notes hanging in the air like drops of crystal, she became aware of Lily staring at her, mouth open in astonishment. Lily seemed at a loss for words. That was beautiful. I've never heard it played like that, not even by my teacher. She looked down at her own hands, then back at Eleanor. "How did you do that?" Eleanor felt heat rising to her cheeks. "I just felt it. Can you teach me to feel it too?" For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor guided Lily through the piece, not by technical instruction, but by helping her hear the music beneath the notes. She showed her how to let her hands relax, to let the music breathe, to find the hidden rhythms that made Debussy's work so special. When Lily played the section again, the difference was remarkable. Not perfect, but alive now, flowing like moonlight on water. "That's it," Eleanor encouraged. "You're hearing it now, not just playing it," Lily beamed. "This is amazing. Why aren't you a piano teacher instead of cleaning houses? You're better than Ms. Patel, and my parents pay her $80 an hour." Eleanor smiled sadly. "Life takes unexpected turns sometimes. Now you should get dressed before someone notices you're missing." She started to stand, but Lily caught her sleeve. "Wait, play something else, please. Something you love." Eleanor knew she should refuse. They had already pushed their luck too far. But the feeling of the keys beneath her fingers had awakened something in her that refused to go back to sleep. "Just one more," she said. Without sheet music, without preparation, Eleanor began to play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It had been her mother's favorite, the piece they would play together on quiet evenings when her father was still at the mine. As her fingers moved across the keyboard, Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes. How could she have denied herself this for so long? How had she survived without this part of herself? The piece built to its emotional climax, Eleanor swaying slightly with the music, lost in the memories and feelings that came flooding back. As the final chords faded, she heard a small sound from the doorway. Eleanor's head snapped up, her hands jerking away from the keys as if burned. Mrs. Harrington stood there, her face unreadable, her handbag still on her arm. "Grandma!" Lily jumped up. I thought you were at breakfast. Patricia has the flu, Mrs. Harrington said, her eyes fixed on Eleanor. The breakfast was canceled. Eleanor stood up, smoothing her apron with trembling hands. Mrs. Harrington, I can explain. Lily, go to your room and get dressed, Mrs. Harrington said, her voice unnervingly calm. But Grandma, now, please. Lily shot Eleanor an apologetic look before scurrying past her grandmother and out of the library. When she was gone, the silence stretched between the two older women like a taut wire. I'm sorry, ma'am, Eleanor finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Miss Lily asked for help with her recital piece. And you play beautifully, Mrs. Harrington interrupted. Eleanor blinked, certain she had misheard. That was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Mrs. Harrington continued. Opus 9 No. 2, my mother used to play it. She walked further into the room, setting her handbag on a side table. Where did you learn to play like that? My mother taught me, Eleanor said cautiously. She was a church pianist and gave lessons. Mrs. Harrington studied her with new eyes. And you've worked here all these years, dusting pianos you were forbidden to play? Eleanor nodded, unable to read the expression on her employer's face. Your father-in-law made it very clear when I was hired. The family's possessions were not for servants' use. My father-in-law, Mrs. Harrington said with a sigh, was a man of rigid views and his time. She walked to the window and looked out at the gardens. Did you know I fought with him when I married his son? He thought I wasn't from a good enough family. My father owned a department store, new money, not inherited wealth. He never let me forget I wasn't born a Harrington. Eleanor stood perfectly still, unsure what to make of this unexpected revelation. Mrs. Harrington turned back to face her. How long has it been since you played before today? 56 years, ma'am. Mrs. Harrington's eyebrows rose. 56 years? And you can still play like that? It seems some things stay in the hands, Eleanor said softly. And in the heart. For a long moment, Mrs. Harrington was quiet, seemingly deep in thought. Then she straightened her shoulders. Decision made. Our pianist for the gala has canceled, she said abruptly. You know this. Eleanor nodded, confused by the change of subject. And you can play? Very well, in fact. Mrs. Harrington, Eleanor said, realization dawning. Surely you're not suggesting— I most certainly am, Mrs. Harrington said firmly. You will play at the charity gala tomorrow night. But I couldn't possibly, Eleanor stammered. I haven't played in decades, not properly. And the guests, what would they think? They'll think they're hearing a remarkable pianist, Mrs. Harrington said. Whether that pianist is also my housekeeper is none of their concern. I don't have anything suitable to wear, Eleanor protested weakly. We are approximately the same size, Mrs. Harrington said, looking Eleanor up and down. I have several evening gowns that would be appropriate. Eleanor felt as if the ground beneath her feet had shifted. In the space of 24 hours, her carefully ordered life had completely upended. Why would you do this? She asked. Mrs. Harrington's face softened slightly. Perhaps I'm tired of my father-in-law's rules reaching from beyond the grave. Or perhaps I simply need a pianist for my gala. She picked up her handbag and headed for the door. Be ready by 7 tomorrow evening. We'll need to do something with your hair. After she left, Eleanor sank back onto the piano bench, her legs too weak to support her. She looked down at her hands, workers' hands, servants' hands, and for the first time in 56 years, she also saw them as a pianist's hands. Tomorrow night, she would play again. Not in secret, not in stolen moments, but before an audience of the city's elite. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Oh, Mom, she whispered. Can you believe it? For a moment, she could almost hear her mother's voice. I always knew you'd find your way back to the music, Ellie. It was always inside you, waiting. The day of the gala arrived with a flurry of activity throughout the Harrington mansion. Florists transformed the grand ballroom with cascading arrangements of white roses and hydrangeas. Caterers bustled in and out of the kitchen. Cleaning staff polished every surface until the whole house gleamed. Through it all, Eleanor moved in a daze, performing her duties by habit while her mind raced with music and memories. Eleanor, you haven't heard a word I've said, Mrs. Wilson, the cook, complained as they reviewed the kitchen schedule for the evening. I'm sorry, Eleanor said, blinking back to the present. What were you saying about the dessert service? Mrs. Wilson studied her with concern. Are you feeling ill? You've been walking around like a ghost all day. I'm fine, Eleanor assured her, though her stomach was twisted in knots. Just a bit tired. How could she explain? No one in the staff knew about her upcoming performance. Mrs. Harrington had decided to keep it a surprise, both for the guests and the household. Only Lily knew, and she had been sworn to secrecy, though her excited glances whenever she passed Eleanor threatened to give everything away. At 4 o'clock, Mrs. Harrington sent for Eleanor. She found the older woman in her dressing room, surrounded by gowns laid out across the bed. "Come in, Eleanor," Mrs. Harrington said, inspecting a midnight blue dress with a critical eye. "We need to decide what you'll wear tonight." Eleanor stood awkwardly just inside the doorway. In 43 years of service, she had never been invited into Mrs. Harrington's personal chambers as a guest, rather than a servant. "I've selected a few options," Mrs. Harrington continued, seemingly oblivious to Eleanor's discomfort. "The black is classic, but perhaps too severe. The red is festive, but might be too bold. The blue, I think, would suit your coloring." Eleanor touched the blue gown hesitantly. The silk felt cool and smooth beneath her work-roughened fingers. "It's beautiful, but I couldn't possibly—" "You can and you will," Mrs. Harrington said firmly. "A pianist must look the part." She held the dress up against Eleanor's frame. "Yes, this will do nicely. Now about your hair." An hour later, Eleanor barely recognized herself in the mirror. Her silver hair, usually pinned in a practical bun, had been styled by Mrs. Harrington's personal hairdresser into an elegant updo. A light application of makeup softened the lines around her eyes and brightened her complexion. The midnight blue gown, slightly altered to fit her perfectly, transformed her from housekeeper to distinguished guest. "There," Mrs. Harrington said with satisfaction. "Now you look like the accomplished pianist you are." Eleanor stared at her reflection, memories washing over her. For a moment, she could see her mother's face superimposed over her own, smiling with pride. "Mom would have loved to see this," she whispered. Mrs. Harrington's expression softened slightly. Parents' dreams for their children have a way of coming true, even if not in the way they imagined. She adjusted a pin in Eleanor's hair. "Now, have you decided what you'll play?" Eleanor nodded. "Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the one you heard yesterday. Then Debussy's Clair de Lune for Lily. And I thought I might finish with Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring. It was the last piece my mother taught me." "Perfect," Mrs. Harrington approved. 3 pieces that show range but aren't overly ambitious after so long away from performing. She checked her watch. "The guests will begin arriving in an hour. You should go to the music room and practice one last time." The Steinway grand piano waited for her, its lid raised to its full concert position. Eleanor approached it with reverence, running her fingers lightly over the keys. Yesterday's playing had awakened her muscle memory, but she still felt nervous. What if she froze? What if she made mistakes? What if the audience laughed at the idea of a housekeeper performing for them? "Stop that," she told herself firmly. "The music is what matters, not who's playing it." She sat down and began to warm up with simple scales and arpeggios, feeling the familiar patterns flow from her fingers. Then she played through each of her chosen pieces, not at full intensity, but enough to reassure herself that she remembered every note, every nuance. As she finished the Bach piece, she heard a small sound behind her. Turning, she found Lily watching from the doorway, already dressed in a pale pink gown for the evening. "You look beautiful." "Miss Lily?" Eleanor said with a smile. "So do you," Lily replied, coming into the room. "I almost didn't recognize you. You look like a famous pianist." Eleanor laughed softly. "Hardly famous. Just an old woman who used to play." "Used to?" Lily raised an eyebrow. "You're playing tonight and you're amazing. That makes you a pianist, not someone who used to play." Out of the mouths of children, Eleanor thought. "Thank you for that reminder." Lily sat beside her on the bench. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Eleanor admitted. "It's been a long time since I played for anyone besides my mother. Just pretend we're the only ones listening. You, me, and your mom," Lily suggested. "That's what my teacher tells me to do when I'm nervous at recitals." Eleanor felt a rush of affection for the girl. "That's excellent advice." The sound of the doorbell announced the arrival of the first guests. Lily jumped up. "I should go. Grandma wants me to help greet people." At the door, she turned back. "Eleanor, I'm really glad you're playing tonight." After she left, Eleanor continued practicing softly, losing herself in the music until a maid came to tell her that Mrs. Harrington requested her presence in the small sitting room off the ballroom. There she found Mrs. Harrington reviewing the evening's program. "Ah, Eleanor," You'll play after the main course, but before the auction, she explained. I've simply listed you as special guest pianist on the program. Are you ready? Eleanor took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. The ballroom was transformed for the evening, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over elegantly dressed guests. Round tables draped in white linen surrounded a small area left clear for dancing later. The Steinway had been moved to a position of prominence near the front of the room. Eleanor watched from a side door as the guests enjoyed their dinner. There must have been 200 people present. The mayor, business leaders, old money families, all in their finest clothes and jewels. Her hands grew cold with nervousness. Stop fretting, Mrs. Harrington said, appearing beside her. You'll be magnificent. As the dessert plates were being cleared, Mrs. Harrington moved to the center of the room and tapped a knife against her crystal glass. The chatter died down as the guests turned toward their hostess. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to our annual charity gala, she began. Before we move to the auction portion of our evening, I have a special treat for you. As many of you know, we were to have featured the pianist Anton Peterson tonight. A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone had received the notice about the cancellation. However, Mrs. Harrington continued, we have been fortunate to secure an even more remarkable talent. Someone whose story reminds us that true gifts often hide in plain sight. Please welcome our special guest pianist. This was it. Eleanor stepped forward, feeling as though her legs might give way beneath her. The crowd's polite applause was undercut by curious whispers. She could imagine what they were thinking. Who is this woman? Why haven't we heard of her before? She made her way to the piano, focusing on placing one foot in front of the other. The walk seemed to take forever. Finally, she reached the bench and sat down, adjusting her gown before placing her hands in her lap to steady them. Eleanor raised her eyes and scanned the crowd. Most faces were simply curious or politely expectant. A few showed confusion or even mild disdain. Who was this unknown performer replacing the famous Anton Peterson? Then she spotted Lily, sitting with her parents, giving her an encouraging thumbs up from beneath the tablecloth. Next to Lily sat Mrs. Harrington, her expression unreadable but her eyes fixed intently on Eleanor. For a moment, Eleanor thought she saw something like hope in the older woman's face. Hope not just for a successful performance, but for something deeper, something like redemption. Eleanor closed her eyes and imagined her mother sitting beside her, as she had so many years ago. Play from your heart, Ellie, she could almost hear her say. The notes are just the beginning. She opened her eyes, lifted her hands to the keyboard, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne filled the ballroom, tentative at first, like a bird testing its wings after a long confinement. Then as the music flowed through her, Eleanor's confidence grew. Her body swayed gently with the melody, her fingers finding each note with increasing certainty. The piece built and receded like ocean waves, carrying emotions too complex for words. In those moments, Eleanor forgot the audience, forgot the years of silence, forgot everything except the conversation between her heart and the piano. This was what she had been born to do, this translation of feeling into sound. As the final notes of the Chopin piece faded, there was a moment of profound silence. Eleanor's hands remained poised above the keys, trembling slightly. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. Others joined in, the applause building until the entire room was filled with it. Eleanor looked up, startled. She saw faces shining with emotion, some with tears streaming down cheeks. Mrs. Harrington was nodding with quiet satisfaction. Lily was bouncing in her seat with excitement. With renewed confidence, Eleanor began her second piece. Clair de Lune flowed from her fingers like liquid moonlight, each note crystalline and emotive. By the time she reached the Bach piece, she was no longer playing for the audience or even for herself. She was playing for her mother, for her father, for the dreams they had for her and the gift they had nurtured. When the final chord of Jisoo, Joy of Man's Desiring, resonated through the ballroom, Eleanor bowed her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. The room erupted in a standing ovation, the crowd on their feet applauding with genuine amazement and appreciation. Mrs. Harrington approached the piano, taking Eleanor's hand to help her rise. Leaning close, she whispered, I believe we've just found our regular pianist for all future Harrington events. Eleanor could only nod, too overwhelmed to speak. After 56 years of silence, her music had finally been heard. The morning after the gala, Eleanor woke up in her small bedroom feeling as though she'd dreamed the whole thing. But the midnight blue gown hanging on her closet door proved it had been real. She sat up slowly, running her fingers through her hair, which still held traces of the elegant style from the night before. Her hands. She looked down at them, weathered, lined, spotted with age. The same hands that had scrubbed floors and polished silver for over 4 decades had last night made music that brought people to tears. She flexed her fingers, feeling a pleasant soreness like muscles awakening after a long sleep. A knock at her door startled her. "Eleanor?" It was Mrs. Wilson. "Are you awake? Mrs. Harrington wants to see you in the study right away." Eleanor's stomach tightened. The magic of last night was over and reality had returned. Perhaps Mrs. Harrington regretted her impulsive decision to let a servant perform. Perhaps there had been complaints from the guests. Embarrassment for the family. "Tell her I'll be right there," Eleanor called, getting out of bed. She dressed quickly in her uniform, pinning her hair in its usual bun. As she made her way to the study, she passed several staff members who smiled at her oddly or whispered to each other. So they knew. News traveled fast in a household. Mrs. Harrington was sitting behind her husband's desk when Eleanor entered, reading the morning newspaper with a cup of tea at her elbow. She looked up and studied Eleanor for a moment. "You've gone back to your uniform." "I see," she said, setting the paper aside. "Yes, ma'am," Eleanor replied, standing with her hands clasped in front of her. Mrs. Harrington gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Eleanor. We need to talk." Eleanor perched on the edge of the chair, back straight, hands in her lap, the way she'd been taught to sit when receiving instructions from the family. "Do you know what this is?" Mrs. Harrington asked, turning the newspaper around. Eleanor leaned forward to look. There on the society page was a photograph of her at the piano, caught in a moment of passionate playing. The headline read, "Harrington Gala Stunned by Servant's Hidden Talent." "Oh," Eleanor said softly, her cheeks warming. "Arthur Henderson was at the gala last night," Mrs. Harrington continued. "He's the music critic for the paper. He rarely attends these society functions, but his wife is on my hospital board." She tapped a section of the article. He writes, and I quote, "The unnamed pianist displayed technical skill and emotional depth that would be impressive in a conservatory graduate, let alone someone who claimed not to have played in over 50 years. The Chopin Nocturne was rendered with such tenderness that this hardened critic found himself moved to tears." Eleanor stared at the paper, speechless. "He goes on," Mrs. Harrington said, clearly enjoying Eleanor's reaction. "The story of a household employee with extraordinary talent, hidden in plain sight for decades, is as compelling as the music itself. One wonders how many other gifts remain undiscovered among those we pass every day without truly seeing." Eleanor felt tears threatening. "That's very kind of him." "It's not kindness, it's an accurate assessment." Mrs. Harrington set the paper aside. "I've received 17 phone calls this morning. Everyone wants to know who you are, where you studied, if you'll play at their events." "I don't understand," Eleanor said, feeling overwhelmed. Mrs. Harrington leaned forward. "What don't you understand, Eleanor? You're a gifted pianist who captivated a room full of people who attend concerts at Carnegie Hall. You've been discovered, as they say in show business." "But I'm a housekeeper," Eleanor said simply. "And now you're a housekeeper who plays the piano. Or perhaps," Mrs. Harrington paused, "a pianist who used to keep house." Eleanor's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying things change, Eleanor. Life takes unexpected turns." Mrs. Harrington stood and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens. "You've worked for this family for 43 years. You've been loyal, dedicated, and discreet. You've also denied your true gift because my father-in-law was a rigid old snob who couldn't imagine servants having talents beyond serving." She turned back to face Eleanor. "I'm offering you a choice. You can continue as our housekeeper, with the addition of playing at our events when we entertain. Or," she took a deep breath, "you can move into the guest cottage with a proper salary and become our resident musician. You would play when we host, yes, but also have time to practice, perhaps even teach." Eleanor felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her. The guest cottage? The charming 2-bedroom house at the edge of the property had always been reserved for visiting relatives or important guests. "It's sitting empty most of the year anyway," Mrs. Harrington said with a wave of her hand. "And it has that small sunroom that would be perfect for a piano. We could move the library up right there. It's never used anyway. I don't know what to say, Eleanor stammered. Say yes, came a voice from the doorway. Lily stood there still in her pajamas despite the late morning hour. Please say yes, Eleanor. Mrs. Harrington raised an eyebrow at her granddaughter. Were you eavesdropping, young lady? The door was open a crack, Lily said without a hint of remorse. And this is important. She came into the room and stood beside Eleanor's chair. Everyone's talking about you. My dad's friend Mr. Chen asked if you'd play at his daughter's wedding, and my music teacher called this morning to ask who you are, and if you'd consider taking advanced students. Eleanor looked from Lily's eager face to Mrs. Harrington's expectant one. This is happening so fast. Yesterday I was just a housekeeper, and today you're still you, Mrs. Harrington said gently. But now everyone else can see what should have been obvious all along. Eleanor thought of her mother, of the jar labeled Eleanor's future, of all the years of silent longing. What would her mother say if she could see her now? The answer came immediately. She would tell her to grab this chance with both hands. Yes, Eleanor said, her voice stronger than she expected. Yes, I would like that very much. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Eleanor continued her duties as housekeeper while the guest cottage was prepared, but each day brought new changes. A baby grand piano, not the library upright as originally suggested, was delivered to the cottage's sunroom. Invitations arrived for Eleanor to play at various functions. A reporter from the local public radio station came to interview the servant pianist, as she was now known. Through it all, Eleanor felt as though she were living someone else's life. Each morning, she half expected to wake up back in reality, dusting the Steinway rather than playing it. But each day the new reality solidified a little more. On her last day as housekeeper, the staff threw a small party in the kitchen. Mrs. Wilson had baked a cake decorated with a piano made of frosting. The gardener presented her with a pot of lily of the valley to plant at her new home. The younger maids, who had always seen her as a stern authority figure, now looked at her with something like awe. We'll miss you, Mrs. Wilson said, cutting the cake. Who's going to keep us all in line now? I'm only moving to the cottage, not the moon, Eleanor laughed. You'll still see me every day. It won't be the same, one of the younger maids said. But we're all so happy for you, Mrs. Mills. Later that afternoon, Eleanor packed the last of her belongings into 2 suitcases, all she had to show for 72 years of life. The old wooden box with her mother's photograph and newspaper clippings, a few books, clothes that Mrs. Harrington insisted would need to be supplemented with a proper pianist's wardrobe. As she took one last look around the small room that had been her home for so long, Eleanor felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness for the years spent denying her true self, gratitude for the security this job had provided, excitement for what lay ahead, and underneath it all a sense of coming full circle, of returning to the path she was meant to follow all along. Lily appeared at her door, eager to help carry the suitcases. I can't wait for our first lesson, she said as they walked toward the cottage. You promised, remember? I remember, Eleanor smiled. Mrs. Harrington had arranged for Eleanor to give Lily piano lessons 3 times a week, with the possibility of taking on a few other students if she wished. The cottage was everything Eleanor could have dreamed, cozy but elegant, with large windows that filled the rooms with light. The sunroom, now a music room, had been painted a soft blue that reminded her of the dress she'd worn at the gala, and there in the center stood the baby grand piano gleaming in the afternoon sun. Go on, Lily urged. Try it out, Eleanor.